Howdy, it's John's D&D Vlog episode number 47. This is Jonathan Scott. Thank you very much. We got to 400 subscribers. I'm happy about it. So anyway, I was going to talk today about keeping things small and messy, which I know that probably doesn't sound like something you would want, but let me explain myself. Dungeons & Dragons came from the Lord of the Rings. There's a lot of people who will tell you otherwise, but honestly speaking, Dungeons & Dragons came from the Lord of the Rings. There were other books and other sources of information that mattered, but honestly speaking, it's 90% Lord of the Rings. So how does D&D compare to the Lord of the Rings, right? So on that Facebook group I always talk about, I asked just a simple question. What were all the magic items you could remember from the Lord of the Rings and from The Hobbit? And then they helped me come up with this list here. Honestly speaking, it turned into a firestorm because everyone was so happy to talk about it, right? I've never seen a post get so many replies so quickly. People love the Lord of the Rings still today, right? So anyway, this is a list of all the magic items that we could kind of come up with. There's more, but these are the ones that actually affected the storyline. There's a total of 44 on this page, and honestly speaking, the other rings there, the one that's got the 19 after it, most of those rings had absolutely nothing to do with the story. I mean, Galadriel, she had her ring that she showed, but other than that, you never saw any of the other rings, right? 44 magic items in The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. How does that compare to the average D&D campaign? So I'm going to show you a list of all the different magic items from two of the different progressions that I run. This first one is from the Keep on the Borderlands and the Isle of Dread and White Plume Mountain. I run those three as a progression, right? Anyway, this is a list of all the magic items. So in the Lord of the Rings, you've got 44, and in this one here, you know, it's 134, right? I'm also going to show you a list of all the magic items from the Temple of Elemental Evil, which will get, it's about the same length of a story as is the first progression that I mentioned, right? And here, there's even more. So, honestly speaking, the biggest problem D&D has had over the years, the thing that's kind of limited our ability to have fun, is that there's so many rewards available in these modules, it kind of takes the whole idea of getting a reward and makes it not actually that valuable of an experience. So that was about magic items. What about the actual statistics of the characters involved, right? So Gandalf was only a 5th level magic user. This is an article that came from Issue of the Dragon, issue number 5, from 1977. Anyway, in the issue, he just went through all the different spells that it said that Gandalf had cast, and when you compared him to a wizard in Dungeons and Dragons, it ended up that Gandalf was only 5th level, right? All the hobbits, they went off to do the Lord of the Rings stuff, and when they came back, they had much better armor, much better weapons, and they had survival training or whatever. Maybe all the hobbits went up to like 2nd level, maybe 3rd level, but it wasn't 15th or 20th. The whole idea behind all of this is that it's a good idea to think small when you're doing your campaign. This is a video of one of the early guys of D&D. His name's Tim Kask, and he was the editor for Dragon Magazine. Why do you want to think small? Why is it so important to think small when you're in a D&D campaign? Because that's where the fun is, right? He goes into better detail than I will, but basically what he's trying to say is that the struggle is where the fun is. And when you actually succeed, then it's time to retire a character and move on. And you go back to the struggle where the fun is, right? Those little building blocks that happen along the way matter in a small-minded campaign. In a big campaign, those little building blocks, those little magic items you get along the way, it all doesn't matter. You want each step to be a memorable thing for your players. So, like in The Hobbit, what if Bilbo had discovered Sting, a +2 sword maybe, but then in like the 5th chapter he discovered a +4 sword and then a +5 sword? No one would care about Sting, but because he only found that one sword, everybody loves Sting. Going overboard lessens the fun for everyone. In Fred Funk's campaign, he had a magic shop. In another campaign I was in as a player, they had a magic shop. In my campaign, I have a magic shop. I'm finally starting to realize that having a magic shop is kind of a bad idea. What ends up happening is all your players lean on it really heavy. They go there all the time looking for new things to use. It's like your players constantly want to get more powerful and stronger, But as a DM, you have to realize that if you let them do whatever they want to do, it's not going to be as fun for them, right? So in order for them to have more fun, you need to limit them, right? And this goes across the board, not only with magic items, but also with their statistics and their levels and the spells they have available to them. To go too far is just kind of silly and ends up not being fun. Okay, so that's the problem. How do you solve it, right? What do you do if you're in a campaign and you've allowed magic to get out of control? What if you're in a campaign and you've allowed your players to become too strong? What if you have chosen to go big? It's called a Monty Hall campaign, right? How do you get out of that? Because if you all of a sudden just make the decision, that's it, you guys can't use this anymore. I'm going to hold back your strength by so many points. You're going to get your players really mad, right? So how do you pull back from all that, right? So one thing I thought about doing, this is just what came to me as I was getting ready to do this episode, was like in Tolkien, he declared ages, right? And in the earlier ages, the world was full of magic, and that's where all the big, huge heroes came from. But now in the current age, everybody became all these small, little, teeny, tiny people compared with what happened in the olden times, right? So maybe that's just something you could do. You could finish up what you're currently in the middle of and then declare a new age, right? And then all of a sudden, you just make the world a different place. That way, at least your timeline can stay intact, right? Aside from that, I mean, if you've got any other ideas, I'd love to hear them. You could just put them into the comments of this particular video. I'm sure other people would love to hear it too. It's nice when things calm down. Keeping all that in mind, there's still going to need to be some way for a person to become a first-level wizard or cleric, right? Therefore, there are teachers out there. There has to be in order for the game to function. Also, if you were to go into a cave and find a magic item, many people would want a way to sell it. So who would you sell it to? Who could you sell it to? Would the government try to limit that? There probably will never be a nuclear weapon convenience store out there. Second Amendment purists might vote for it, but the majority would probably not allow it. Nevertheless, there does need to be a way for new players to get spells, right? And honestly speaking, if there are teachers, those teachers probably know more than the 3 or 4 spells that they taught the player. So what are the odds of a spell being available to players, right? This is the chart I use in my campaign. In my opinion, spells should be increasingly difficult to gain access to. There are probably plenty of people who know and will teach to others the light spell, but there's going to be far fewer who know and are actually willing to teach improved invisibility or wish. There's going to be very few people who are willing to teach those, if any at all, right? Also, if there are magic items in your world, your PCs are going to try to sell them, and of course there are going to be people who are going to be willing to buy them. I personally didn't like the prices in the Dungeon Master's Guide, right? 2,700 gold pieces for a wish spell scroll seems very cheap to me, right? In my campaign, if you have a scroll, you can study that scroll and you can learn that spell for yourself, right? So 2,700 gold pieces seemed very cheap to me. Anyway, this is the chart I use for my world. But be prepared though, right? Offensive spells might even be more expensive. Useful spells might even be cheaper. These numbers are all just guides, and depending on the demeanor of the person who's doing the selling or the buying, the prices might change even more. You're always going to have to make your own decisions on this. There's no solid rule I can give you. The basic rule of thumb is this, right? Any spell over first level should be a miracle to 99% of the people who see it. And any magic item greater than a potion of healing, and honestly speaking, a potion of healing too, should be a miracle to 99% of the people who see it. You need magic to be rare. You need magic to be rare in your game. If it ever becomes common, it'll become increasingly hard for your players to be entertained. You need to limit your players so that they can have more fun. Keep your game small. At the beginning of this video, I talked about keeping it small and messy. So I just got done talking about keeping it small. But what do I mean by keeping it messy, right? Why would you want your campaign to be messy? So, about being messy, right? Where did the Lord of the Rings come from? So, of course, it came from Tolkien's head, but where did Tolkien get all those ideas, right? This is a book I bought a while back, about 20 years ago, and it's just got a whole bunch of little short stories in them. I was going to read you one called The Fairy's Revenge, right? It's pretty short. What I'm hoping you'll see is that It's when you look at the monster manual, it shows the armor class, it shows the hit dice, everything's been turned into numbers, but that's not how these stories are supposed to read. The numbers are there to give you guidelines on how some encounters will happen. I don't think it's all supposed to be as cut and dried and quantified and like measured as the stats make it look, though, right? There's supposed to be some mystery about what happens in the stories. If there isn't, it's just a bunch of people rolling dice, collecting XP and gaining levels. It's kind of a shallow experience, right? So anyway, here's a story about some fairies. When I'm done, you tell me, like in the comments below, which you thought was more interesting. I mean, this story or the normal average encounter you probably would have with fairies in D&D. The Fairies' Revenge by Lady Wild. The fairies have a great objection to the fairy raths, where they meet at night, being built upon by mortal man. A farmer called Johnstone, having plenty of money, bought some land and chose a beautiful green spot to build a house on, the very spot the fairies loved best. The neighbors warned him that it was a fairy rath, but he laughed and never minded, for he was from the north and looked on such things as mere old wives' tales. So he built the house and made it beautiful to live in, and no people in the country were so well off as the Johnstones, so that the people said the farmer must have found a pot of gold in the fairy rath. But the fairies were all the time plotting how they could punish the farmer for taking away their dancing ground, and for cutting down the hawthorn bush where they held their revels when the moon was full. And one day, when the cows were milking, a little old woman in a blue cloak came to Mrs. Johnstone and asked her for a porringer of milk. "Go away," said the mistress of the house. "You shall have no milk from me. I'll have no tramps coming about my place." And she told the farm servants to chase her away. Some time after, the best and finest of the cows sickened and gave no milk, and lost her horns and teeth, and then finally died. Then one day, as Mrs. Johnstone was sitting spinning flax in the parlor, the same little old woman in the blue cloak suddenly stood before her. "Your maids are baking cakes in the kitchen," she said. "Give me some off the griddle to carry away with me." "Go out of this," cried the farmer's wife angrily. "You are a wicked old wretch, and have poisoned my best cow." And she bade the farm servants to drive her off with sticks. Now the Johnstones had only one young child, a beautiful bright boy, as strong as a young colt and as full of life and merriment. But soon after this he began to grow queer and strange, and was disturbed in his sleep, for he said the fairies came round about him at night and pinched and beat him, and some sat on his chest, and he could neither breathe nor move. And they told him he would never leave him in peace unless he promised to give them a supper every night of a griddle cake and a porringer of milk. So to soothe the child, the mother had these things laid every night on a table beside his bed, and in the morning they were gone. But still the child pined away, and his eyes got a strange wild look, as if he saw nothing near or around him, only something far, far away that troubled his spirit. And when they asked him what ailed him, he said the fairies carried him away to the hills every night, where he danced, and danced with them until morning, when they brought him back and laid him again in his bed. At last the farmer and his wife were at their wits' end, from grief and despair, for the child was pining away before their eyes, and they could do nothing for him to help him. And one night he cried out in great agony, "Mother, mother, send for the priest to take away the fairies, for they are killing me. They are here on my chest, crushing me to death," and his eyes were wild with terror. Now the farmer and his wife believed in no fairies and in no priest, but to soothe the child they did as he asked, and sent for the priest, who prayed over him and sprinkled him with holy water. The poor little fellow seemed calmer as the priest prayed, and he said the fairies were leaving him and going away, and then he sank into a quiet sleep. But when he woke in the morning, he told his parents that he had had a beautiful dream and was walking in a lovely garden with the angels, and he knew it was heaven, and that he would be there before night, for the angels told him that they would come for him. Then they watched by the sick child all through the night, for they saw the fever was still on him, but hoped a change would come before morning, for now he slept quite calmly with a smile on his lips. But just as the clock struck midnight, he awoke and sat up, and when his mother put her arms around him, weeping, he whispered to her, "The angels are here, mother," and then he sank back and so died. Now after this calamity the farmer never held up his head. He ceased to mind the farm, and the crops went to ruin, and the cattle died. And finally, before a year and a day were over, he laid in the grave by the side of his little son, and the land passed into other hands, and as no one would live in the house, it was pulled down. No one either would plant on the rath, so the grass grew again all over it, green and beautiful, and the fairies danced there once more in the moonlight, as they used to do in the old times, free and happy, and thus the evil spell was broken forevermore. But the people would have nothing to do with the childless mother, so she went back away to her own people, a broken-hearted, miserable woman, a warning to all who would arouse the vengeance of the fairies by interfering with their ancient rights and possessions and privileges. According to the DMG, Pixie is a 6th level monster, which is a pretty good sized monster. And it talks about these guys having Otto's irresistible dance that they can cast it on something as a natural ability. It would be a pretty good fight depending on who goes up against them, but still. I mean, this is what the average fight against a couple of pixies would look like, right? Which was more interesting to you, that story or this? Because this is how it usually goes in D&D. When I say be messy, I mean you've got to get in there and mess around with the inner workings of the whole experience. So it's not just dice rolling. There's actually a narrative going on. And you're missing out on so much if you can't get in there and mess around with the details and really avoid the numbers, you know. In the Temple of Elemental Evil, T1 to 4, it says vaguely what happens if Zuggtmoy gets loose, right? If you guys fail to kill her at the end of the adventure. But what I'm thinking is that there's spells that Zuggtmoy knows that the player's handbook is unaware of, right? And the odds are very good that these pixies are going to know spells and have abilities that the monster manual and the player's handbook aren't aware of. I mean, in the original story, why did the farmer get all sad and morose and then eventually just lay down and die, right? And the woman, she gets all mad and frustrated and bitter until she dies, right? You've got to add that really complicated, detailed uncertainty to your stories to make them memorable. If it's just you rolling dice and adding up hit points worth of damage and collecting XP, it's not much of a story. This is what I mean by making it messy. It's got to be a complex, detailed, kind of ugly, kind of scary, messy, uncertain, mysterious sort of experience, so that's a very memorable thing for your players. Not everybody can do that, and if you can't do it, then I guess you just lean on the rolling of the dice. But if you can, it can bring your party such a wonderful experience. You should put out some effort trying to do that, right? Anyway, that's what I mean by making it messy, keeping it messy. It's to bring out all of the extra details that the rule books don't know about. Anyway, so that's all I was going to do for this week. Thank you very much to the 400 subscribers. I hope we get some more. I'll see you guys sometime. I'm not sure when the next episode's going to come out. The next one's going to take me some time. Anyway, have a good evening. Have good games. Have a nice day.